I've arrived in Tokyo pretty much a month into the conflict in the Middle East, and which shows no signs of letting up anytime soon. How do you assess that what's going on over there is impacting the economies in this part of the world?
Asia gets something like 80% of its oil through the Strait of Hormuz, from the Persian Gulf. Some of these economies have big reserves, so Japan, Korea, China have lots of reserves. They can really see things out for a pretty long time. But even there, we're starting to see, pressure on prices, particularly for things like gasoline and so on. The bigger effects, I think, are really felt in, the middle income and the developing countries. Philippines has declared a state of emergency now. We're seeing shortages of all sorts of fuel in places like India and in Pakistan.
Is there a fear here that what's going on in the Middle East is leaving this region vulnerable?
So the US and Israel are using a hell of a lot of interceptors to shoot down missiles. We've seen some weapons and indeed some troops that are based out here in Asia move to the Middle East. I don't think governments in Asia necessarily worry that there's kind of an immediate threat, but I think what it does really underline for them is how stretched the US is, right?
It's kind of a big deal for Japan, isn't it? Traditionally a sort of pacifist nation, hasn't spent very much on defence traditionally, but I guess the rather like in Europe, that calculation is changing.
China outspends Japan something like 6-1, right? 300 billion. And Japan is responding to this. They are slowly but steadily building up their defences, particularly on the southwestern islands. But certainly for Japan, the world just does seem much more dangerous. China and Japan, as our readers and viewers know, are in the middle of something of a diplomatic spat. I dislike using that word because a lot of it is really China's economic coercion in response to a single thing that was said by the Japanese Prime Minister. But nonetheless, that was around Prime Minister Takaichi's remark that Japan would probably have to get involved in a conflict in Taiwan just because it's so close and because their treaty ally, the United States, would probably get involved as well. I think, for Japan, the Taiwan issue is a very important one. They do not want the Chinese border to move however many hundreds of miles it is to Taipei. They do not want China to be in control of the Taiwan Strait because that's economically very important to Japan. It's where they get their energy imports. It's where all the container ships with Japanese exports go through. And China has already shown that it will resort to economic coercion when it's not happy.
Prime Minister Takaichi just got back from her visit to the US, which seemed to go very well. They obviously like each other. Do you have any sense of what she offered the US in return for this continued sort of friendship?
We know that there was a trade agreement and in exchange for tariffs of 15% or so, Japan agreed to invest an awful lot of money in the United States, $550 billion. We are starting to see those investments come through, which will certainly keep President Trump happy. Those so far have mostly been in things like energy, which Japan hopes will ultimately benefit its own economy. I think that more recently, of course, we had President Trump really putting pressure on allies to help in some way with the Strait of Hormuz and reopening it. He singled out Asia specifically, as I recall, because as we were talking about, the Strait is so important to Asian economies such as Japan and even China. But in meeting in Washington, D.C. at their summit, it seems that Prime Minister Takaichi was very clear about what Japan could and couldn't do.
One thing you don't want to signal too much, when we go in, we went in very hard, and we didn't tell anybody about it because we wanted surprise. Who knows better about surprise than Japan? Okay? Why didn't you tell me about Pearl Harbor? Okay? Right?
What about the Pearl Harbor moment? How did that go down over here?
People understand that President Trump isn't always as diplomatic as one might have expected from other presidents. That indeed is part of his popular appeal, I guess. I don't think it was a huge issue. I think they're kind of, used to these things. They're much more concerned about what the realities of the relationship, the brass tacks about it on trade and on defense and so on.
We're not quite a year and a half into Trump's second term. He's done an awful lot on the international stage. Now he may switch his focus to the midterms. The midterms right now aren't looking likely to deliver particularly rosy results for him and the Republican Party. So perhaps people are beginning to think about life beyond Trump.
I think the attitude of countries here is that we need to find a way to keep the US on side. No one is expecting everything to go back to what it was before Trump.
No.
Not just in national defense, if you think of something like tariffs, right?
Yeah.
I mean, once a country puts on tariffs, it does not lower them. I think governments in Asia, in Seoul and in Tokyo and elsewhere, I think they're pretty clear-eyed about this, and I don't think they expect to go back to the world that existed before, not in any way, really.